I heard the tires leave the driveway the exact moment the first contraction broke my breath. He told me he was only leaving for 48 hours on business, but his phone had already auto-tagged a romantic getaway. When he returned, the one thing he did not expect was that I had already delivered our baby, woke up from the fog, and rewritten the entire ending. My name is Lauren Briggs. I am 36 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life building risk assessment models that predict disaster before it happens. Living in Greyhaven, with the ocean constantly battering the cliffs outside our window, usually calms me. But that Tuesday, the logic that usually anchors me failed completely. I was 40 weeks pregnant, my ankles were swollen, and my patience was thin. Evan Kincaid, my husband, is the CEO of Ridgeway Atlas Partners. To the world, and specifically to his 40,000 followers on LinkedIn, he is the ultimate family man. He posts about work-life balance while taking calls during dinner. He curates an image of devoted success. The night before, everything fell apart. Evan sat on the edge of our bed. He held my hand, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "I have to check on the server migration downtown," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "But I promise. I won't leave you, not when we are this close." I wanted to believe him, but I saw his eyes dart to his wrist. His watch lit up. A single message notification popped up. It was just an initial. S. He swiped it away before I could focus, but the timing was off. "You should stay here," he insisted, standing up and smoothing his suit. "The doctor said you need absolute bed rest. Don't try to move around too much. It isn't safe." Then he did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. He walked over to the chair where I had placed my hospital bag packed for weeks, ready for the emergency run, and he picked it up. "Let's just put this away for now," he muttered. "It looks cluttered." He put it in the closet, on the top shelf, a place I could not reach without a step stool, which was dangerous for a woman 9 months pregnant. It was a small act, but it felt like he was disarming a bomb. Or disarming me. 2 hours after he left, the first contraction hit me like a physical blow to the spine. It was not a practice cramp. This was it. I grabbed my phone. I called Evan. It went straight to voicemail. "Evan, please pick up. I think it's happening." I left the message, my voice shaking. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing. My logic brain kicked in. I opened the security app on my phone to check the driveway camera, thinking maybe he was just pulling back in. The footage from 10 minutes ago played back. Evan walked out the front door. He was not carrying his laptop bag. He was rolling a large suitcase. He did not turn left toward the city and his office. He turned right toward the highway on-ramp. I did not cry. I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I dialed the emergency medical hotline. "I am alone," I told the operator. "My husband is unavailable." "Okay, Lauren." The voice on the other end was calm. "We are sending a unit, but I need you to breathe. Stay on the line with me." The next hour was a blur of clinical efficiency. I unlocked the front door between contractions so the paramedics could get in. I drank water. I focused on a crack in the ceiling plaster. There was no hand to hold. There was no one to wipe my forehead. The house was silent except for the dispatcher's voice and my own ragged breathing. When it was over, and our daughter was sleeping in the bassinet the paramedics had helped me set up before they left to file their report, the house felt enormous. The silence was heavy. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. The physical pain was fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was not an accident. He did not just miss the birth. He managed the risk of my labor interrupting his plans. He chose to be absent. I reached for my iPad on the nightstand to email the pediatrician. As the screen woke up, the photo widget refreshed. Evan and I shared an iCloud account for family photos. It usually just cycled through pictures of our golden retriever or snaps of the ocean. But a new album had just appeared, syncing automatically from his phone, which must have just connected to Wi-Fi somewhere. The album title glared at me in crisp, black font Cedar Ridge Weekend. I tapped it. The timestamp on the first photo was from 3 hours ago, exactly when I was breathing through the transition phase of labor. I sat up in bed, the iPad glowing harsh and bright in the dim room. My fingers hovered over the glass. I opened the first photo in the new album. It was a low-angle shot of a rustic ceiling with heavy timber beams, the kind you find in 5-star alpine lodges. The next photo showed a small round table by a roaring fireplace. There were 2 crystal glasses filled with dark red wine. Draped over the back of one of the leather armchairs was a charcoal gray cashmere coat. I knew the texture of that coat. I bought it for Evan for his birthday 3 months ago. The third photo was where my breath hitched. It was a selfie, but angled carefully. Evan was smiling, looking relaxed in a way I had not seen in years. Next to him, a shoulder pressed against his. A strand of blonde hair caught the light, but the face was cropped out. It was surgical cropping. Whoever took this knew exactly where the frame needed to end to maintain plausible deniability. I tapped the information icon at the bottom of the screen. The metadata spilled its secrets. Location Cedar Ridge Lodge. Time 8:42 in the evening. I looked at the hospital wristband still on my arm. At 8:42 in the evening, I was gripping the edge of the sofa downstairs, unable to stand, while the paramedic told me it was too late to transport me to the hospital. While my body was tearing apart to bring his child into the world, he was sipping wine 200 miles away. Suddenly, a banner notification slid down from the top of the screen. Because the devices were synced, I saw what he saw. It was a text message from a saved contact listed only as S. You did good. She will be quiet. I stared at the words. I did not cry. There were no tears left in my system, only a vast, arid desert where my heart used to be. She will be quiet. Was he talking about the baby, or was he talking about me? My mind began to race backward, replaying the last 9 months. The pattern emerged with terrifying clarity. Evan had missed the 20-week anatomy scan because of a board meeting. He missed the glucose tolerance test because of a client emergency. Yet, he was available for the maternity photo shoot on the beach 3 weeks ago. He had posed with his hand on my belly, looking adoringly at me while the photographer snapped the pictures that went straight to his public profile. He only showed up when there was an audience. A soft knock on the front door downstairs pulled me from the screen. It was Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor from across the street. She was 70 years old and noticed everything. I moved slowly down the stairs, clutching the banister, and opened the door. "Lauren, dear," she whispered, handing me a casserole dish covered in foil. "I saw the ambulance leave. Is everything all right?" "We are fine, Mrs. Higgins," I said, my voice sounding strange and detached to my own ears. "Just a false alarm that turned into a home birth." She peered behind me. "Is Evan not back yet? I saw him leave with his suitcase." "He had a trip," I said. Mrs. Higgins frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, I saw the car pick him up. Very fancy. Black sedan, tinted windows. I thought it was a hired service." But the driver got out to help him with the bag. A woman, very tall. "A woman," I repeated. "Blonde," Mrs. Higgins added helpfully. I thought maybe it was his assistant. I thanked her and closed the door. I leaned my back against the wood. It was not a taxi. He did not drive himself. He was picked up. This was not an impulsive affair. This was logistics. Evan was not just cheating on me, he was managing me. He viewed my pregnancy and labor as a high-risk variable that needed to be isolated so he could execute a merger with someone else. I went back upstairs and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Before I was his wife. I was the one who set up the entire backend of Ridgeway Atlas Partners. I still had the administrator root keys to the calendar system. I never used them, out of respect for his privacy. That respect died tonight. I bypassed the public calendar. I bypassed the shared family calendar. I went straight into the hidden layer, the executive private schedule that only he and his admin could see. There it was, blocked out for the next 3 days. Brand retreat soft launch. I stared at the entry. In our world, a soft launch is when you release a product to a limited audience to test the metrics before the official public reveal. You check for bugs, you gauge interest. But Ridgway had no new products in the pipeline. A cold realization settled in my stomach, heavier than the child I had just carried. He was not testing a piece of software. Soft launch was for her. He was introducing her to his inner circle this weekend. He was beta testing his new life, seeing how she fit into the narrative, while his old life was busy recovering from childbirth in a silent house. I looked at the sleeping baby in the bassinet. Then I looked back at the screen. Okay, Evan, I whispered to the empty room. Let's see who has the better data. I did not grow up near the ocean. I came from Mapleford, a small, flat town in the plains where the wind never stopped blowing. My mother was a nurse who worked the night shift, and my father was a mechanic who fixed engines until his hands were permanently stained with grease. In our house, we did not have long, emotional conversations. We had discipline. We had silence. We valued things that worked, and we fixed things that were broken without complaining about them. That upbringing made me a natural with data. While other girls were dreaming of weddings, I was building probability models. Long before I met Evan, long before Ridgway Atlas Partners existed, I wrote a risk analysis engine. I named it Orbit. It was designed to predict market volatility by analyzing non-financial data points. It was elegant, efficient, and entirely mine. Then Evan came along. He was everything I was not. He was charismatic, loud, and he filled every room he entered. He looked at my code and saw a kingdom. Lauren, he had said to me on our third date, leaning across the table with that intense look that made me feel like the only person in the world. You have the genius, but I have the stage. Imagine what we can build together, 50-50, always. I believed him. I thought I was gaining a partner. I did not realize I was being acquired. The erasure happened so slowly, I barely noticed it until I was invisible. After the wedding, the narrative shifted. In public, Evan stopped introducing me as the co-founder. I became ops support. Then I became my lovely wife who keeps me grounded. He reduced the architect of his empire to a domestic accessory. The moment that truly broke me happened 6 months ago, though I did not admit it to myself until tonight. I was sitting in the audience at a tech summit. Evan was on stage, bathed in a blue spotlight, mesmerizing the crowd. Data is not just cold numbers, he told the audience, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. It is the heartbeat of our future, a love letter to the chaos of life. I felt a physical sharp pain in my chest. I had written those exact words to him in a private email on our anniversary, trying to explain why I loved my work. He had not just stolen my code, he had harvested my soul for sound bites. I stood up from the bed, moving carefully to avoid waking the baby. I walked to the back of the closet and pulled down a box I had not opened in 3 years. Inside was my old laptop. It was heavy, thick, and ugly compared to the sleek devices we used now. I plugged it in. The fan whirred loudly, sounding like a jet engine in the quiet room. I waited for the boot sequence. I navigated to the command line. I typed in the query for the commit logs, the digital history of every line of code I had ever written for Orbit. The screen filled with lines of white text. User Lauren B. Date November 12th, 2018. That date was 2 years before Evan registered Ridgway Atlas Partners. I stared at the glowing text. This was the smoking gun. This was the proof that the core technology of his multi-million-dollar company was intellectual property that belonged to me, created on my hardware, long before our marriage license was signed. A cold realization washed over me. Evan was never afraid of me getting angry. He knew I was introverted and conflict-averse. He relied on my silence. What he was actually afraid of was my memory. He was afraid of the evidence. "You think you are safe," I whispered to the photo of him on the nightstand. "You think I am just the mother of your child. But you forgot I am the mother of your company, too." I closed the laptop. I would not call him. I would not scream. Confrontation was messy and emotions were variables that caused errors. I was done with errors. I was going to do the one thing I was better at than anyone else. I was going to audit the truth. At 2 o'clock in the morning, while the rest of the world slept, I made the call that would turn my suspicion into a case file. I called Maren Holt. We had gone to university together. Maren did not look at numbers the way normal people did. To her, a spreadsheet was a crime scene, and every decimal point was a fingerprint. "Lauren." Her voice was raspy with sleep, but it sharpened the moment I told her to check her secure email. "Give me 5 minutes." I sat in the dark nursery, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the crib. When Maren called back, her tone had shifted from groggy to clinical. "I am looking at the Ridgeway ledger you mirrored," Maren said, the sound of typing clicking furiously in the background. "There are significant outflows categorized as consulting fees and client gifts. But Lauren, the patterns are too regular. $25,000 on the 1st of the month, $12,000 on the 15th. These are not variable expenses. This is a payroll for someone who isn't on the payroll. Can you trace the recipient?" I asked. "It goes to a holding company in Nevada," she replied. "But here is the interesting part. The legal retainer for the holding company is paid to a man named Grant Sutter." My blood ran cold. I knew that name. Grant Sutter is not a corporate attorney. He is an estate planner. He specializes in asset protection trusts. You hire him when you want to hide money so completely that even the IRS has trouble finding it. "There is more," Maren said, her voice dropping. "I found a draft folder in the shared drive. It is a restructuring proposal for the next fiscal quarter. I am sending you the screenshot now." I opened the image. It was an organizational chart for Ridgeway Atlas Partners. I scanned the boxes. I saw Evan at the top. I saw the CFO. I saw the empty box for a new chief strategy officer. But I looked for my own box, the operational advisor role I technically held. It was gone. I had been erased from the hierarchy completely. Then I saw the memo attached to the draft. It was a timeline for implementation. One bullet point stood out, glowing like a warning flare. "Execute restructuring protocols after the birth window closes." I stared at those 5 words until they blurred. After the birth window closes. Suddenly, the cruelty of the last 24 hours made perfect, terrible sense. Leaving me alone while I was in labor was not just an act of negligence. It was a strategy. Evan knew that a woman who had just given birth would be physically broken, sleep-deprived, and hormonally flooded. He was banking on my weakness. He wanted me disoriented and desperate for support, so that when he slid a standard legal update in front of me, I would sign it without reading the fine print just to make the headache go away. "He didn't just abandon me, Maren," I whispered, my hand trembling as I touched the screen. He weaponized my labor." "Listen to me closely," Maren said, her voice cutting through my shock. "Do not sue for divorce. Not yet. If you file now, it becomes a domestic dispute, and he has hidden the assets too well. The only way to win this is to strike at the foundation." "The engine," I said. "Exactly." Maren agreed. "Forget the money for a second. Prove you own Orbit. If you own the technology the company runs on, Ridgeway Atlas is just an empty shell. Do you have anything that proves chain of title? Anything tangible?" I hung up the phone and walked to the wall, safe hidden behind a painting in the master bedroom. I dialed the combination my father's birthday, a date Evan never bothered to remember. Inside, underneath our marriage license and passports, was a manila envelope. I pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. It was coffee-stained and wrinkled. It was dated 5 years ago, back when we were living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles. Evan needed to show intellectual property to get his first seed funding, but the investors were worried about liability. So, he had signed an addendum to our pre-incorporation agreement. I read the text under the beam of my flashlight. The undersigned, Evan Kincaid, acknowledges that the source code known as Orbit is the sole intellectual property of Lauren Briggs and is licensed to the company on a revocable basis. He had signed it because he was desperate for cash and never thought I would use it against him. He thought he was managing me then, just like he was managing me now. I ran my thumb over his signature. "You should have read the metadata, Evan," I said softly to the paper. "Licenses expire." Evan returned to the house 48 hours after he left, bringing with him a scent of pine needles and expensive guilt. He carried a massive bouquet of white peonies, the kind that cost more than a weekly grocery bill, and immediately went into performance mode. He hovered over the bassinet, snapping a photo of our daughter's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Within seconds, I heard the whoosh of the upload. I checked my phone. The caption read, "My world. So proud of my warrior wife and our beautiful miracle." He looked up at me, smiling, but his gaze landed somewhere near my chin. He never actually met my eyes. "I am so sorry I got stuck, Lauren," he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. The reception in the mountains it was a nightmare. I tried to drive back the second I got your message, but the storm. "It's okay, Evan," I said, smoothing the blanket over my legs. "We are safe. That is what matters." I kept my voice flat and gentle. I thanked him for the flowers. I watched his shoulders relax. He thought I was tired. He thought I was the same compliant woman he had left behind. He did not know that when a predator thinks you are weak, they stop watching their own back. That evening, as he poured himself a drink, he pitched the idea. "I was thinking," he said, swirling the ice in his glass. "We should have a little gathering on Saturday, just a few key partners and friends. At the Lumen Room. A party." I asked. "I just gave birth 3 days ago. It's not a party, it's a celebration of resilience," he insisted, looking at his reflection in the window. "People are worried. They want to see you. They want to see that we are strong. It would mean a lot to the team." He walked into the hallway to take a call, thinking I was busy nursing. I shifted quietly to the doorway. He had put the phone on speaker while he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Yeah, make sure the lighting is focused on the podium." A male voice crackled from the phone. "We are almost to the part where we announce." Evan saw my reflection in the mirror and tapped the screen off instantly. "Work stuff," he muttered, smiling tight. "Boring logistics." But the damage was done. You do not announce resilience. You announce a launch, or a change in leadership. Half an hour later, my phone vibrated. It was a message on an encrypted app from a number I did not recognize. "Don't go to the party alone. They are prepping images to replace you." Attached was a photo taken surreptitiously of a tablet screen. It was the seating chart for the Lumen Room event. I zoomed in. The head table was a masterpiece of corporate politics. Evan Kincaid, CEO. Directly to his right, in the seat reserved for the spouse or the guest of honor, was the name Sloan Mercer. I scanned the periphery. I found my name, Lauren Briggs, assigned to table 4, near the kitchen entrance, seated next to a junior developer and a freelance graphic designer. Sloan Mercer. I knew the name. She was the new director of communications. She was the blonde hair in the photo. She was the S on his phone. A cold fury settled in my chest, but I forced it down. I made a silent vow right then. My daughter would not be part of this. She would stay upstairs with the night nurse I had already vetted and hired privately. No one would use my child as a prop for their redemption arc. This war was between adults, and it would be fought with paper, not flesh and blood. I went into the study and locked the door. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack toiletries. I began to pack my existence. I opened the safe and removed my passport, my birth certificate, and the deed to the house, which was thankfully still in both our names. I took the external hard drive containing the original Orbit source code. I transferred the contents of my personal savings account to a new bank that Ridgway did not use. I was not leaving. Not yet. But I was preparing the perimeter. I felt like a soldier checking her ammunition before walking out into the firing line. "You want to announce something, Evan," I whispered to the empty room. "I will help you. But you are not going to like the headline." The next morning, I approached my plan with the precision of a structural engineer preparing a controlled demolition. I did not rely on memory. I relied on documentation. I started with the commit logs. I exported the entire development history of Orbit, highlighting the timestamps from 2018, 2 full years before Ridgway Atlas Partners was incorporated. Then, I located the smoking gun in my email archives. It was a message from Evan, sent 3 days before his first big investor pitch. Subject: quick help. Body, honey, can you write up a one-pager explaining how the stochastic variance algorithm works? I don't want to sound stupid if they ask technical questions. You are the brain. I am just the mouth. I saved it as PDF Exhibit A. He had admitted in writing that he did not understand the core technology he claimed to invent. Next, I filed the paperwork for a new limited liability company. I named it Briggs Signal Works. It sounded boring, industrial, and completely detached from the sleek branding of Evan's company. I transferred the intellectual property rights of the original Orbit source code into this new entity. It was a legal maneuver, but a solid one based on the pre-incorporation addendum he had signed. Then came the code. I did not write a virus. I did not program a data wipe. Those were emotional reactions, and they were illegal. Instead, I simply updated the licensing protocol. I altered the authentication token that Ridgway Atlas used to access the Orbit engine. "You are no longer the owner, Evan," I murmured as I typed the command lines. "You are now a tenant, and your lease is about to expire." I set the expiration timestamp for Saturday at 8:45 in the evening, based on the schedule I had seen. That was exactly 15 minutes after the speeches began. It was the moment Evan would be raising a glass to his own success. I programmed the dashboard response carefully. When the token expired, the system would not crash. It would simply stop processing new data. The screens would not turn red. They would turn a polite, neutral gray. A message would appear. License verification failed. Service paused. Please contact the administrator. It was professional. It was bureaucratic. And for a company that processed millions of financial transactions a second, it was fatal. My phone buzzed. It was Marin. "I have the cash flow analysis," Marin said, her voice sounding sharp. "I traced the credit card charges for the Cedar Ridge trip. They didn't even try to hide it well. They billed the hotel suite, the dinners, and even the spa treatments to the company account." "Let me guess," I said, staring at the screen. "They coded it as a business expense under brand refresh." Marin confirmed with a dark laugh. "Technically, embezzlement. Evan and Sloan used shareholder money to fund their affair. If the board sees this, he is done. But Lauren, are you sure you want to pull this trigger?" "I am not pulling the trigger," I said calmly. "I am just handing the gun to the board members." I needed a secure location. I rented a small studio apartment in the city center under the Briggs Signal Works LLC. I moved a server rack, a secure laptop, and physical copies of every document there. It was not a home. It was a command center. I needed to know that if Evan tried to lock me out of the house, I had a place where I could still control the chessboard. As I was sorting through the final stack of old contracts in the safe, my hand brushed against a thin folder I had almost forgotten. It was from a deal Evan made 4 years ago with a regional bank. The bank had been terrified of liability if the algorithm made a mistake, so they demanded a personal guarantee regarding the code's origin. I pulled out the indemnity clause. There it was, in black and white. Evan had signed a statement declaring that the proprietary code was licensed from the creator, Lauren Briggs, to shift the liability off the company books. He had done it to save money on insurance premiums. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. He had sold his future ownership to save a few $1,000s in the past. I took a photo of the signature. This was not just leverage. This was the checkmate. The Lumen Room was designed to impress, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and cold, industrial lighting that made everyone look sharp and expensive. But as I walked in, wearing a simple black dress that concealed the post-birth bandages wrapped around my waist, the room felt less like a celebration and more like an arena. There were 200 people there, investors, board members, and clients. They were all Evan's people. I looked around for a friendly face, but I saw only polite curiosity and whispered judgments. Evan stood on the raised platform in the center of the room. He looked impeccable in a navy suit. Standing just slightly behind him, close enough to brush his arm, was Sloane Mercer? She was wearing a crimson dress that demanded attention, acting as the de facto hostess, directing waiters and laughing at jokes from the managing partners. Evan tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. "I want to thank you all for being here," Evan began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "This week has been a test, a true test. I know there were rumors about my absence during the birth of our daughter, but sometimes, as leaders, we are faced with impossible choices. I had to secure the future of this company. For my family, and my wife, Lauren, she understands sacrifice better than anyone." The crowd applauded. They ate it up. He had successfully spun his abandonment into a noble sacrifice for the greater good. He had edited the narrative, and they were clapping for the fiction. "Lauren, come up here," he beckoned, flashing that winning smile. I walked up the steps. My legs felt heavy, but I kept my spine straight. I stood next to him. Sloane did not move away. She stayed right there, completing the picture. "I have something for you," Evan said, gesturing to an assistant who brought forward a long, velvet jewelry box. "A promise for our new chapter." The guests leaned in, expecting a diamond necklace or a tennis bracelet. Evan opened the box and handed it to me. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was a folded document on heavy, cream-colored paper. A gold pen rested on top. I unfolded it. It was a legal agreement. My eyes scanned the legalese instantly. It was a post-nuptial agreement combined with a non-disclosure agreement. Clause 4. Lauren Briggs acknowledges she played no role in the development of core technologies. Clause 5. In exchange for a monthly stipend of $5,000, Lauren Briggs waives all future claims to Ridgeway Atlas intellectual property. He was doing this in public. He was banking on the social pressure. He thought I would be too embarrassed to read a contract in front of 200 people. He thought I would just sign it to play the part of the grateful wife. Cameras flashed. People were smiling, waiting for the tearful hug. Sloane looked at me with a cool, predatory gaze. Her arms crossed. Evan uncapped the pen and held it out to me. "For us," he said loudly. I took the pen. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the crowd. They were waiting for the performance to end so they could go back to their champagne. I placed the pen gently on the table next to the unfinished document. I did not sign it. "Lauren," Evan said, his smile faltering just a fraction. I leaned toward the microphone, but I did not speak into it. I spoke just loud enough for him, Sloane, and the front row to hear. "I don't sign anything without reading the metadata." The silence that followed was different. It was not the respectful silence of an audience. It was the confused silence of a script going off the rails. Sloane frowned, her composure cracking. She leaned in toward Evan. Evan stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, to the crowd. It looked like an intimate whisper between husband and wife. But his voice was a hiss of pure venom. Don't you dare embarrass me," he whispered, his hand gripping my elbow hard enough to bruise. Sign the paper. Now. Or you walk out of here with nothing. I looked up at him. For 10 years. I had looked at him with love, then with confusion, and finally with sadness. But now, looking at the sweat beating on his upper lip, I felt something new. I felt power. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. I am not the one who should be worried about walking away, Evan, I said softly. He froze. He saw it in my eyes. He realized in that second that he was not pushing a cornered animal. He was poking a trap that had already been set. I slipped away from the suffocating heat of the main hall and found refuge in a small, dimly lit coat check room near the entrance. My laptop was already open on a stack of coats, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. I watched the countdown timer on the Briggs Signalworks dashboard. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a surgeon about to make an incision that I knew would leave a scar, but was necessary to cut out the rot. I closed the laptop when the timer hit 0. I walked back into the Lumen room. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and champagne. Evan was standing by the bar, raising his glass for another toast. He looked invincible. The lighting caught the sharp line of his jaw as he smiled at the investors who controlled his future. 2 new beginnings, Evan announced, his voice booming over the chatter. We are restructuring. Both the company and the family. We are cutting the dead weight to fly higher. The room rippled with polite laughter. He was talking about me. I was the dead weight. I walked straight up to him. I did not run. I did not storm. I moved with the steady, terrifying calm of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I stopped directly in front of him, interrupting his eyeline with the audience. I placed a thick, black envelope on the cocktail table between us. It landed with a heavy, final thud that seemed louder than the music. Evan, I said, my voice low but cutting clearly through the sudden silence near the bar. Before you post your next story, you should explain to the board why the costs for your brand retreat are currently listed in this forensic accounting file as embezzlement. He froze. His smile twitched, looking like a glitch on a screen. Lauren, you are tired. You are making a scene. Then, the sound began. It started with a single vibration on the table, the chief financial officer's phone. Buzz. Then another. Ping. Then a pocket inside a suit jacket. Ring. Within 10 seconds. The room was filled with a cacophony of digital distress signals. It sounded like a swarm of angry hornets. The casual chatter died instantly as every executive, every partner, and every investor reached for their devices. What is this? The CFO shouted, staring at his screen. I am getting a critical alert. The dashboard is down. I can't authorize the trade, a board member muttered, tapping furiously. It says, license verification failed. Service paused. Evan turned pale. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax figure. He laughed, a high, nervous sound that cracked in the middle. It is just a glitch, Evan shouted, waving his hand dismissively. Bartender, a round of your best scotch for everyone on me. Put it on the company card. He slapped his black corporate card onto the bar counter. The bartender swiped it. The machine beeped, a harsh, grinding tone that everyone heard. Declined. The bartender frowned. Sir, it says, security hold due to risk assessment. Evan stared at the machine. His hand started to shake. It was a subtle tremor at first. Then it traveled up his arm until the champagne in his glass spilled over the rim. That is impossible, he stammered. Sloan, call the bank. He turned to his right, but Sloan Mercer was not there. She had taken 3 large steps back. She was looking at him not with love, not with admiration, but with the cold, calculating look of a rat spotting water rising in the hull of a ship. She was physically distancing herself from the contagion of his failure. I don't have the number, Sloane whispered, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. I did not stay to watch him crumble. I did not need to see him beg. I turned around and walked toward the exit. The sound of confused shouting and ringing phones rose behind me like a crescendo. I walked through the double doors and into the cool night air. As I stepped onto the pavement, I checked my phone one last time. The automated email from Briggs Signal Works had just been delivered to the entire board of directors. Attached to it was the PDF of the addendum Evan had signed 5 years ago, confirming that I was the sole creator of the technology they relied on. The notification on my screen simply read, "Sent." It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the elevator doors slid open on the 39th floor of the Atlas Spire. The conference room was cold, lit only by the harsh glare of the city skyline through the glass walls. The entire board of directors was present, sitting around the mahogany table like a tribunal. Evan was already there. He was slumped in a chair at the far end, his tie loosened, looking less like a CEO and more like a man awaiting sentencing. When I walked in, he started to stand up, his eyes widening with a mix of anger and desperation. "Lauren," he started, his voice cracking. "You need to stop this. We can go home and talk." I did not look at him. I walked to the head of the table and placed my briefcase down. "I am not here as Lauren Kincaid," I said to the chairman, my voice steady. "I am here as the majority shareholder of Briggs Signal Works, the legal owner of the intellectual property currently being used without license by Ridgeway Atlas Partners." I projected the timeline onto the main screen. It was undeniable. The commit logs from 2018 showed the creation of Orbit. The incorporation documents for Ridgeway showed a start date of 2020. "Your entire platform runs on borrowed time," I explained, "and the lease has just been terminated." Evan slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous, she is. She is just emotional. I missed the birth, and she is trying to burn the company down out of spite. This is a domestic dispute, not a corporate crisis." "Is it?" I asked. I slid a folder across the table to the chairman. "This folder contains the credit card statements for the brand retreat last weekend. It documents $12,000 in unauthorized spending on a personal vacation for Mr. Kincaid and Ms. Mercer, disguised as business development." The room went silent. Sloane Mercer, who was sitting in the corner trying to look invisible, stood up abruptly. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice high and thin. "I manage communications. I don't control the billing codes." "You signed the receipts." "Sloane," I said, not even turning to face her. "Marin Holt just sent over the digital signatures. You authorized the spa treatments under client retention." Sloane sat back down, her face turning ashen. Then, Arthur Sterling, the oldest member of the board and a man Evan had always called his mentor, took off his glasses. He looked at Evan with pure disgust. "You told us," Sterling said, his voice quiet but heavy. "You told us last month that the IP issue was handled. You said, and I quote, 'I will make her sign the rights away after the baby comes. She will be too tired and too scared of scandal to fight back.' You lied to us, Evan. You made us liable." Evan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. I turned back to the chairman. "I am not here to destroy the company. I built the engine that drives your profits. I want it to succeed. So, I am offering you 2 options." I held up 2 fingers. "Option 1, I said, I file a formal complaint with the SEC regarding the fraudulent financial reporting and the misrepresentation of asset ownership. The stock tanks by morning, and you all spend the next 5 years in court." The board members shifted in their seats. They were terrified. "Option 2, I continued. "We sign a temporary licensing agreement right now. Briggs Signal Works grants Ridgeway a 6-month lease on the technology. In exchange, you terminate Evan Kincaid as CEO immediately. For cause?" "You can't do that!" Evan screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. I built this, you are my wife. I reached into my bag and pulled out the final document. It was the file I had found regarding Grant Sutter. Actually, Evan, I said, sliding the paper toward him. According to these trust documents you had your lawyer draw up last week, you were planning to transfer your shares into an irrevocable trust to shield them from a divorce settlement. You were already planning to leave. You just wanted to make sure I left with nothing. Evan looked at the document. It was the smoking gun of his premeditated betrayal. The game is over. Evan, I said, the board needs to vote. Now! The vote took less than 3 minutes. It was brutal in its efficiency. The chairman did not even look at Evan when he raised his hand. Every other hand at the mahogany table followed in unison. Evan Kincaid, the chairman said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy. You are relieved of your duties as CEO, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal effects only. Evan slumped into his chair. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated instantly. He looked across the table at me, his eyes wet and wide with panic. He reached out, his hand trembling in the air. Lauren, please. He stammered, his voice breaking. We can fix this. I promise I will be better. I will be the father she deserves. Don't do this to our family. I looked at him. I waited for the pity to come, but it never arrived. I felt nothing but the cold calculation of a solved equation. Being a father is not a slogan, Evan, I said quietly. And owning the technology does not mean marrying the person who wrote it. I turned to my laptop. I typed in the final command to restore the authentication token. The system is live, I announced to the room. Orbit is running again. You will not lose a single client when the markets open in 3 hours. But the licensing fee is now retroactive to the date of incorporation, and the new contract is non-negotiable. I slid the final piece of paper across the table toward Evan. It was the addendum, the document he had signed years ago to satisfy a nervous bank manager during his startup days. It explicitly stated that Lauren Briggs is the sole creator and owner of the source code. You signed your own warrant 5 years ago, I told him. You just didn't read the fine print. The chairman turned to Sloane Mercer. She had been shrinking into her chair, trying to look invisible in her expensive red dress. Ms. Mercer, the chairman said, not even bothering to look her in the eye. Your contract is terminated for gross misconduct and misappropriation of company funds. Legal will be in touch regarding restitution. Sloane did not argue. She did not look at Evan. She simply picked up her purse and walked out of the room in silence. The spotlight was gone, and so was she. Evan's phone pinged. Then it pinged again. He looked down at the screen. My accounts, he whispered, his face turning pale. They are frozen. Pending investigation, I said. You built an empire on a lie. Evan, gravity just caught up with you. I signed the final separation agreement. I kept my name. I kept my company. I kept my daughter. Ridgeway Atlas was now just a client, renting space in a world I built. I walked out of the Atlas spire just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. The city was waking up, bathed in a pale blue light. I did not scream. I did not cheer. I simply pulled out my phone and sent a 2-word text to Marin. Risk managed. I drove back to the small apartment I was using as my command center. My daughter was sleeping soundly in her portable crib. She was safe. She was mine. I looked around the small room. It was not a mansion. It was not a penthouse. But for the first time in 10 years, the walls around me did not feel like a cage. He left me alone in the house while I was having our baby to go on a trip with someone else. I whispered to the morning light, but that night, I learned how to never abandon myself ever again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.